Once the dust settled on Young Thug's dramatic arrest, authorities would begin the legwork on building the legal case, and this RICO case against YSL would end up being one of the biggest and most complicated prosecutions in Georgia history. The case was brought by infamous Fulton County District Attorney Fani T. Willis. Raised by a single father who was a former LA Black Panther turned defense attorney, he groomed her for a profession in law from the age of 9, taking her to the courtroom and instilling the importance of justice in her. Graduating from Howard University in 1992, Fani Willis came to Georgia to attend Emory University School of Law, graduating in 1996 and making Fulton County her home. A career trial lawyer, she's led over 100 jury trials and prosecuted hundreds of murder cases with over 19 years of experience. Her first government job was as a solicitor, prosecuting misdemeanors and city ordinance violations, eventually leveling up to getting hired by the district attorney's office. However, it was in the early 2010s, when she was working as the assistant district attorney, that Fani Willis would really make a name for herself, as she would serve as the lead prosecutor on an infamous case where the state of Georgia indicted 35 Atlanta educators on RICO charges, accusing them of giving answers to students and changing the test scores after they were turned in, as well as threatening teachers who would try to report the cheating scheme, essentially painting these teachers and superintendents like mob bosses.
A former superintendent and 34 for employees accused of an elaborate scheme to fake test scores. 3 of them already turning themselves in this morning.
These are school principals, teachers, test coordinators, even a school secretary, and they all have to turn themselves into the jail today.
The same teachers and school administrators who were bragging just a few years ago about double-digit improvements in standardized test results, now charged with racketeering, theft, and false statements, and they've lawyered up. At one school, investigators say the principal and his teachers held after-school parties where they sat around and corrected tests before turning them in to be graded. The indictments read like a rap on the mob, and the boss is former Atlanta School Superintendent Beverly Hall, who could see up to 45 years in prison if convicted. She's one of the few expected to spend the night in jail. Her bond could be set as high as $7.5 million. She's accused of firing teachers who couldn't produce higher test scores, giving bonuses to those who did, and ignoring clear signs that teachers were cheating to make the scores happen. When the going was good, Superintendent Hall was a hero. She earned more than $500,000 in bonuses and was named a National Superintendent of the Year.
23 of the indicted teachers and administrators would end up pleading guilty, while the remaining 12 went to trial, where 11 of them were ultimately convicted on racketeering charges under the Georgia RICO Act. But the biggest shock of the trial would come at the sentencing, as the judge would not just throw the book at them, but the entire shelf, giving out monster sentences that many found to be completely disproportionate to their crimes.
Good evening. There's no harder lesson than the one taught today to 8 Atlanta educators by an angry judge after they were convicted on charges typically reserved for mobsters. He threw the book at them, teachers, principals among them, handing down lengthy prison sentences for their roles in a massive cheating scandal in which standardized test scores at underperforming schools were inflated. The judge told them the conspiracy harmed thousands of children.
This thing was pervasive. It's like the sickest thing that's ever happened to this town.
In a tense courtroom, Judge Jerry Baxter imposed harsh sentences on 8 former Atlanta public school educators convicted of racketeering, conspiring to fix standardized test scores to improve results.
There were thousands of children that were harmed in this thing. This is not a victimless crime.
3 disgraced educators, former teachers and administrators, were sentenced to 20 years, serving 7 in prison, the rest on probation. The others, including a principal and elementary school teachers, were sentenced to 5 years, serving 1 to 2 of them behind bars. Emotions ran high.
How can you say that?
As the sentences came down.
You sit down, I'm gonna put you in jail. If you yell at me, point at me.
It was painful for everyone, including the judge.
I consider you a wonderful educator, and that's what makes it so sad. I've got the fair sentence in my mind, and it involves going to jail.
Before Willis would get her hands on the YSL case, this was the longest and most expensive criminal trial in Georgia history, and it would end up dragging on for years, with appeals still ongoing a decade later.
The longest and most expensive criminal trial in Georgia history still has not concluded. Almost a decade later, 6 defendants in the Atlanta public school cheating scandal are still appealing their 2015 convictions.
It was the most unnecessary trial that I've ever seen. 8 months of witnesses, hundreds and hundreds of documents, thousands of court hours, where no child was remediated was a waste of time.
Prosecutors successfully argued the educators participated in a racketeering scheme to change test scores for financial gain. Dozens of teachers took plea deals and worked community service. Two of the educators, Tamara Cotman and Angela Williamson, already served time in prison and have been released. A public defender now represents the remaining 6. He has told Judge Baxter it is a conflict of interest to represent all 6 and has now asked off of the case. These advocates say the educators have suffered enough.
However, despite the time and money spent on the case, the success of the prosecution against this dangerous gang of classroom gangsters catapulted Fani Willis to legal stardom, creating an alluring precedent of delivering complicated and long RICO-style indictments to unconventional targets, and gaining monumental levels of clout off the back of the high-profile trials that followed. From here on, her career would seemingly go from strength to strength, both within the DA's office and in a private practice that she would start in 2018 to truly secure the bag. And she would later brag in an Atlanta Voice article how she built her reputation working for the DA's office for 16 years, 8 of those being in the homicide departments. With 100 cases under her belt, she claimed that she was in the top 10% of lawyers. It's no surprise then that Willis was beginning to set her eyes on bigger aspirations, initially running for a seat on the judge's bench in the Fulton County Superior Court in 2018, but losing. Then in 2019, she would successfully run to become the chief municipal judge for South Fulton before stepping down to run for an even greater position. And on January the 1st, 2021, she made history becoming the first woman to be elected as the district attorney of Fulton County, after she campaigned on a commitment to protect Fulton's neighborhoods and reduce crime. This was a cutthroat race that actually saw Willis going head-to-head with her former boss and winning. In a promotional video released at the end of 2021, Willis updated the Atlanta public on her plans as the DA, vowing to clear the backlog of cases and blaming the previous administration and the pandemic for the courts not getting the job done.
When we took office, we found a backlog of cases unprecedented in Fulton County's history because of the cases that were stalled by the pandemic of our courts and the prior mismanagement of this office by the former administration. We found 22,000 pending cases, half of which hadn't even yet been indicted. We also found in excess of 50,000 closed cases that were not properly entered into the public record. I have brought in new, highly experienced staff to serve our community, and we have been working around the clock to clear the backlog and make sure we get dangerous defendants indicted and keep them off our streets. We are pushing cases through to trial or pleas to get justice for victims, and we have made real progress, but we still have more to do. In 2022, we are going to be continuing those efforts, and we are going to be working on programs for restorative justice and alternatives for Fulton County.
But funnily enough, in this role, it would seem that rather than prioritizing the historic cases that affected normal people, she would continue to breed a reputation for using the state's RICO Act to prosecute non-mobsters in cases that were designed to grab headlines. And her next move would make her one of the most infamous prosecutors in American history, dropping an explosive RICO indictment on then former President Donald Trump for alleged election interference in Georgia. The long-shot prosecution is still ongoing and has been complicated infinitely by Trump's dramatic 2024 election victory. But regardless of the outcome, the case was at least initially a huge success in raising Fani Willis's profile in the legal profession, as extensive coverage of the case and her role in it would circulate in media all over America, with Willis painting a dramatic picture of her battle with the former president, making things often very much about herself.
In Fulton County, new details in the investigation of former President Donald Trump. District Attorney Fani Willis is requesting a special grand jury to gather evidence and compel witnesses to testify. The move would allow Willis to subpoena requests to the grand jury, a special grand jury that would be formed, and that process could ultimately unlock powerful tools to advance this investigation.
Open with you here. Ms. Willis, you've been in office a little over a month, and you've announced to the governor and others that you've opened an investigation into the former president of the United States. Was that the way you were expecting to start off your tenure?
Actually, on day one in the office, which was January the 4th, I worked actually the 1st through the 3rd, but on the first official day in the office, January 4th, was the announcement of this issue. And so, no, I would say that I probably had the most unusual first day of work of anyone ever.
Some on the other side of the political aisle might say you're just trying to grab headlines. You're just trying to make a name for yourself.
I have no interest in headlines or making a name for myself. I'm in my dream job. All I ever wanted to be since I was a child is a lawyer. Once I became a prosecutor, there was no other job more appropriate for me. I hate bullies. I love what I do. I want to be a part of keeping our community safe. And I don't know what the headlines would get me when I'm already sitting in the best job on earth. I signed up to do this job and to do a very good job and to work very hard. Did not sign up to die, though. No American citizen has the right to incite violence or put anyone in harm's way. How soon I knew an investigation may be warranted was on day one. And so upon hearing the phone call and the reports that were done, almost immediately I knew if there was something to be investigated that we would be the appropriate office. We are looking at the total scope. You know, people have become very frustrated with me because they'll say, you know, well, you heard the phone call, that's enough. But I think to appropriately evaluate the circumstances, you don't go into investigations like that with the end in mind. You go in seeking information that leads you to the truth. This job is an honor. It's an honor to sit here as the first African American woman, and that I very much understand how many people's shoulders I stand on to sit right here.
However, it seems that even the president wasn't a big enough fish for Fani Willis, and as she had firmly committed to cleaning up the streets of Atlanta that had been plagued by the rising violent crime rates fueled by gangs, the 2022 indictment of Young Thug and the YSL members would soon become the new biggest media moment of her career, but things would get very complicated very quickly. Some would suggest that Fani Willis had a conflict of interest, as she had allegedly formally represented some of Atlanta's most notorious street figures that she was now prosecuting. People like the co-founder of YSL The Music Crew, Mondo, who would reveal in a Rolling Stone interview that Willis had actually defended him in 2019 in an aggravated assault case, calling her a great attorney who had been able to finesse the charges down and allowing Mondo to avoid prison time. But interestingly, YSL Mondo would not be charged in the bigger YSL case, this perhaps being a strategic move to avoid anyone claiming any conflicts of interests, with him being a previous client of Fani Willis. Mondo would even go on to say that charging YSL didn't seem like it was in her character, and suggesting that it was someone else within the DA's office that was actually pushing her to prosecute the community that she was formerly protecting, even going as far as to say that she understands what's going on in the streets, stopping just short of calling Fani Willis street herself. Fani Willis would be a formidable opponent, but on the other side, Young Thug and his crew would seek the services of one superstar lawyer who might just be able to make magic happen. On the opposite side of the legal battle was Young Thug's defense lawyer Brian Steele. Steele had grew up in Queens, New York, and had initially contemplated a career on Wall Street until he visited the stock exchange trading floor and experienced the soulless, cutthroat environment firsthand, which convinced him to study law instead. He would first aim at a career as a tax attorney, but one case involving a 13-year-old kid charged as an adult for murder would change his mind, and afterwards Steele would move to Georgia to become a public defender, before eventually starting his own law firm and climbing the legal ladder to become one of the top defense lawyers in the state. According to Brian Steele, he had been representing Young Thug for about a decade before the YSL RICO dropped, and in 2018, Thug can even be heard mentioning him in the song Oh OK with Gunna and Lil Baby, bragging about Brian Steele being his lawyer, which showed that in Atlanta legal circles, Brian Steele has been a force to be reckoned with for some time. However, it was during the YSL RICO trial when Brian Steele would become known nationwide, as Thug's fans would come to love his genuine connection with the rapper and his captivating and explosive performances in the courtroom.
And if I get another false allegation and you do nothing, I'm shocked. I'm appalled at you. I sit here day after day with this false allegation just machine. This is the second time that this honorable court in front of the jury has addressed me inappropriately and wrongly. Second time. The first time I gave the state discovery of a song from a Super Bowl. Weeks before, there was an objection. You assumed that I didn't give it to the state. I didn't want to embarrass the court. So you were yelling at me and saying, do you understand me? Do you understand me? And instead of saying, do you understand that you're wrong? I sat here and I said, yes, Your Honor. That was to protect the integrity of this courtroom and the court. Now you say in front of the jury how unprepared I am. I am not unprepared for anything.
Okay,
I have no. I need to make a record. Your Honor,
Mr. Steele, wait a second.
The state said it explains the effect.
Okay, which call? Which call?
These calls, as you.
Okay, well then why?
It gives me no pleasure in saying this. I believe that this honorable court is biased against Mr. Williams and or his counsel, and I ask you to consider recusing yourself. Why?
Okay.
Why do I have to bring up? You should be bringing up. This is crazy. This is like communist Russia.
Some months after Thug's arrest, Brian Steele would give an interview to Atlanta's local 11 Alive News, where he would give first insights about how the defense would be approaching the case, showing that they were particularly against the idea of using lyrics as evidence, and leaning on the common argument that this was a serious freedom of speech issue.
We are sitting down today with Brian Steele. Thank you so much for making time for us today. How you doing?
I'm okay. How are you?
I'm doing well. I'm doing well. You know, let's start off with the national conversation that's happening right now about rap lyrics, whether they should be allowed in courtrooms during cases and whether they should not be. We know New York is having this discussion, Fulton County is having this discussion, you know, LA, so many courtrooms nationwide. What are your thoughts on that?
I don't believe that unless the lyric has a direct relation to the supposed crime on trial, and there's evidence to support that, the fact that somebody has created words that are in a song or in a book or in a movie, they should not be judged by their work, performance, because that's storytelling. So the problem I really have with the lyrics from rap music throughout our country and right here in Fulton County is we don't do that with other types of entertainment or artistry. And that's really my problem, because to me, rap music has been birthed by the struggle of the inner city, poverty-stricken, oftentimes people of color. And why are we targeting that group rather than a writer who talks about a killing or drug dealing? Or how about the white songwriters?
Why does rap music oftentimes feel like it's on trial as a genre?
It seems like it's racist to me.
Steele would also argue that the case was fundamentally about people trying to evade their own problems with the law, but using Thug as a scapegoat, as they knew how much Atlanta law enforcement wanted to find reasons to catch Thug out simply due to his fame.
For someone like him who does mean so much to his community that he came up out of, why is he under attack? Why is he being targeted?
He's like the easy target. So if somebody gets arrested and gets in trouble and they want a deal, law enforcement officers are all too eager to say, well, tell us about Mr. Williams. Is he involved in this? What do you know about him? That's the problem with this case. It's coming from the word of people who are getting deals to say, yeah, he was there, or I saw him around, or he gave the order, or I heard from someone else he gave the order. That's what this case is about. You're not going to hear any confession of Jeffrey Williams.
If fame was what the prosecution were looking for, this is indeed what they would get, as the trial of Young Thug and YSL was set to become one of the biggest and most high-profile trials in Georgia history, being live-streamed on numerous media platforms and racking up millions of views. The trial became a media circus that fans, haters, and regular people interested in true crime began following with great interest. And there certainly was no lack of twists and turns to report on during the trial, and even more was going on behind the scenes. For example, a video would years later be posted online showing that only about a month after Thug had been arrested, the guards were already searching his cell for contraband, with this video too causing drama, as it would show that Thug had plastered his cell wall full of pictures of women, including not only his current girlfriend Mariah the Scientist, but also his ex-girlfriend Jerica Carle. But more than anything, this video showed just how drastically the tables had turned for Thug, who had gone from living in mansions to living in a tiny cell, where the most luxurious thing he had going on was the fact that he didn't have to share his toilet with another inmate. But there was one person who likely felt even worse to have gotten wrapped up in this case, and that of course was Thug's label mate Gunna, who had barely even known Thug when many of the more serious crimes in the indictment had actually taken place. But nevertheless, after being wrapped up in the indictment, due to his close proximity to Thug, Gunna unfortunately had a tough decision to make, one that would ultimately end up destroying his reputation in the rap game for good.